There are all kinds of medieval movies, TV shows. Everything seems to be kings and queens. So I think we go back in time and I let you know that recipes are coming. So since we're going back in time, our recipes are going to be a little back in time as well. But I've compared a lot of different recipes to try and figure this out, and we are going old-timey, simplified, I guess we'll call it. So I have a half a cup of water, and we're gonna start making a crust for a pork pie. And so the first thing I'm gonna do is I have a decent-sized pinch. I just went into my jar of spice, went and grab some saffron. Now here's the thing, with my saffron, I'm gonna sprinkle it into my water and just gently push it in. And what's gonna happen is you're gonna notice that the water is going to start turning just a tiny bit yellow. And if I put it right on top of my flour as kind of a background, you can see it's already starting to turn that yellow color. If you've never purchased saffron before, it can be a little alarming because it's expensive, but you get a lot and it lasts for a long time and it can go for quite some time. So happy heads up, my one jar of saffron was $25 when I went to the grocery store. You can skip that, but it does add a nice flavor to the crust. So in here, what I have is I have 3 cups of flour. I also have 8 tablespoons of butter at room temperature. I'm using unsalted butter. If you use salted butter, it's fine, but it will change the flavor just a tiny bit. Not in a bad way, there'll just be that salt taste to it. So what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing this and pinching off small pieces. Now this has been sitting out for a little while, and in here we have lots of lights all over the place so you can see everything that I'm doing. So my butter is softer. It's going to come together, a lot faster having butter this soft, so it won't take us too terribly long. If you're working with just regular room temperature butter, it will take a little bit longer to bring together, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab it and I'm just going to take and crumble it in my hands. And each time I make a dough like this, that's what I'm gonna do, is crumble it together, because I want that butter to start breaking down. And because my butter was so soft, we are already to that point where I can start adding in my other ingredients. So my other ingredients are pretty straightforward because we're working with an old recipe, and a long time ago, you had to grow what you ate, so it's not like you were running to the grocery store to get things. So in here I have 2 egg yolks. I've already broken them and stirred them all together. I want that broken apart before I put in there. Now, I don't have to worry about using a rubber scraper because I'm gonna mix this with my hands. They didn't have electric mixers, so we're gonna do this with our hands. And a lot of things today that we do are gonna be with our hands. So what I've done is I've let my saffron sit in my water, and now I'm going to slowly start adding this in. I don't want to add that water in too quickly, because if I do, it's really going to make a soupy mess. So I'm going to grab my water, and we can see it's a really nice golden color now. It almost looks like the color of olive oil when you pull it out of the bottle. So I'm going to add just a tiny little bit. I don't have to dig out those ribbons of saffron. That'll be just fine to have in there. And what I'm going to do as I'm going to start mixing it. Now, you are gonna get goobery hands by doing this, just like this, but that's okay, because as time goes on, that will start to come together to form that dough. So I've got that first round of saffron water mixed in. I'm gonna come back in with a little bit more. I'm gonna do this in 3 or 4 doses. And I'm just gonna rub my hands together. And when I rub my hands together, it forms these little dough balls, and that's the easiest way to get it off your hands. If you spend time picking at your fingers like this, yeah, it'll work, but it won't go too gosh darn quick. So what I do is I just roll them together like that, and it comes off really nicely. So I'm gonna come back with another batch of water. And now I'm to the point where I'm just basically flopping it over on itself. I don't want to over squeeze this. I still want to keep a little bit of that butter in there as chunks. Now, when I've got all of my water incorporated, I still kind of have a dough that's falling apart. So what I'm gonna do, because it's Minnesota and because it's pretty temperamental with our weather, you don't know if you're gonna get rain, snow, sleet, hail, the occasional sun. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little bit more water into this to bring it all together. Sometimes you'll need more water, sometimes it'll be perfect, and sometimes you'll need more flour. It just all depends on what the clouds up in the sky are doing. When I add my water this time, it's just gonna be regular old water. I don't need to flavor my water. I've already got more than enough flavor punch from that first round of saffron. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to, even though it's not totally combined, I'm gonna grab a pinch of flour and I'm gonna sprinkle it on my surface, because what I'm eventually gonna be doing is rolling this out into a disc. So let's work on combining this all together and making a nice dough for ourselves. If I need to add a little bit more water once it's out here, I can, so it's no big deal. So what I'm gonna do is grab my fingers, put them in the water, and just put a little slap-a-dap on there. Put some more flour on my surface and get myself ready to start rolling this out. Alrighty, that looks pretty gosh darn swell to me. So with this recipe, we are going to be making a pork pie, like I said. So that means that I need to have the right kind of pan. So this pork pie is gonna be a little bit on the thick side. What I'm actually gonna use is a 9-inch springform pan. And if you haven't used a springform pan before and you're looking for one in a store, that means you're looking for one with this hinge on it. So when the time comes to pop it out, I just press that hinge, it springs open, and then I am ready to take it out. So what I'm gonna do is I have a rolling pin. I'm gonna flour up my rolling pin, and my rolling pin has guides on it, these little wooden wheels, and I'm gonna take this down to about 1/8 of an inch. The nice thing about this dough is it is a ready to go dough. Some doughs, like one you're gonna see in just a little bit, you have to rest so all of the pieces come together and do what they need to do. This one, as soon as I have it made, I can start rolling it out to get ready to use it. You can see too, all of these little red ribbons that are running through here, these are my pieces of saffron, and that's gonna give me some really nice flavor. Now, I've got this big sheet of dough. I'm gonna move my springform pan nice and close. I'm gonna work quickly and I'm gonna fold this back on itself, and now I'm going to lift it all up and start putting it into my pan. So with this, I wanna work it so I have it up on my edges. There we go, that looks nice. If it folds over a little bit on itself here or there, that's okay. If I've got any gaps, I'm just gonna come around, squeeze it to the edges, just like so. And now, I do not wanna waste my dough, because this pork pie, like every other pie, needs a top. So the easy and quick way to do that is to take and just run my rolling pin right across the top, just like so. And then everything that's extra, I'm just gonna come around and swoop away. I'm gonna do one more press to my edges. And this does not need to be baked before we put our filling inside of it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move this to the side. I'm gonna roll out my dough for my top crust, and then we are ready to make our filling. So we have our crust ready to go. We have our top of our crust ready to go. Now we need our pork filling. So what I'm gonna do is I have 1.5 pounds of ground pork here. If you feel like you want more flavor after you try this recipe the first time, yes, you could substitute sausage for this, but just that regular old ground pork is just fine and dandy for this recipe, because we are gonna add some seasoning to it. So I am going to start browning this. So what I'm gonna start doing is getting my other layers ready, because this pork pie is going to have a pork layer, a barbecue sauce layer, an apple layer, and then a cheese layer. So I'm going to get my apples ready. So what I have is I have 2 apples. You can use your favorite apple flavor that you like, and I'm just gonna start by peeling these. Alrighty, so I have my 2 apples peeled. I'm gonna take my knife and I'm going to slice it into little discs, but I want these to be not too giantly thick, but not so gosh darn skinny that they disintegrate once you start baking them. So I've got these nice little rings here. So the thing I need to do next is actually core my apples, and you're probably thinking to yourself, well, that was silly. Why didn't you do that before you cut them apart? I also, on top of them being cored, need them cut into smaller pieces. So this is my cooking hack for you. It's not very medieval and old-timey, since I highly doubt like the chef in a castle would have something like this. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna press it down on my apple on each of my discs. And when I do that, I then am left with all these little apple pieces and I don't have my core. So that's gonna save me one little extra step of chopping. So if you don't mind that extra dish to clean, that's my tip of the day for you. That sounded kind of like tip of the day for you. Ooh. So my apples are all chopped up, ready to go. So I'm actually done with these. And now we can go back to this pork and see how it's doing. All right, my meat is almost all cooked. So I'm gonna start adding in my seasonings, and there's really just two. Well, 2 plus salt and pepper. In here I have 1 tablespoon of poultry seasoning. We've got a little chicken mixing in. And then we also have a 1/2 teaspoon of cumin. So I'm gonna stir this all together, start combining my flavors while the last little bit of this cooks. All right, and now that that's all combined, I'm gonna come in with some salt and some pepper. This is to your liking. So we'll go to a little salt, a little bit of peps, some pep in your mouth, I guess, while you're eating it. All right, do a little stir. So the last thing I need to add is I have 1 whole tube of actually Ritz crackers. And so I'm just gonna stir that together, and it kind of, what that ends up doing is it absorbs some of that liquid and it kind of then turns it into stuffing that's mixed in there. So now I'm gonna come and I'm going to, because this is hot, actually I'm gonna move my pan up and put it on this trivet. And I'm gonna pop this in here. And because this is so hot, you're gonna wanna be careful from this point forward. Got it all scraped in. And because I was getting it nice for you, so you could see, I accidentally pulled my crust down along the edges. And we'll just tuck that back just like so. And now, I'm just gonna even that out all nice and smooth. And my next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in with 1/3 cup of barbecue sauce. And that's just gonna be another layer of flavor. And you can use whatever gosh darn barbecue sauce you find delicious. My next layer that I'm gonna come in with is my apples that we already diced up. And this is another thing that as those apples cook down, the juices are gonna come out. It's gonna keep everything nice and moist. You don't really wanna sacrifice any juice because then you run the risk of getting a dry pie. And any time a food rhymes, you know you've got a problem. So you don't want a dry pie. And now the last thing I'm gonna do before I top it is come in with some shredded cheddar cheese. And what I've got here is just about 1 cup. And now we're gonna top my pie with my leftover pie crust. So I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna lay that on the top just like so, and I'm gonna work to pinch my edges together. And if I've got a little gap here or there, that's okay. Remember, we're medieval. We like it rustic. And now that I have that all folded in, I'm just gonna grab my paring knife and I'm gonna cut some vent holes on the top. So I'm gonna start with 3 longer lines. And then just to give it a little bit of huzzah, isn't that something you yell like at a huzzah jousting event? I'm gonna take and cut 3 smaller pieces coming off the edge just to kind of make it look a little bit like maybe a leaf. If you are a pie princess, is that medieval? A princess probably wouldn't make a pie. If you are a pie master, I don't know, a pie wizard, a pie wizard, that's better. You could, if you wanted to, make some more dough and you can make some sort of dough sculpture on the top, but really it's not necessary. Just these little bit of vent holes. And so I've got my leaf design cut into the top of my pie. I'm going to pop this into my oven at 375 degrees for 1 hour, and this pork pie is done. So our side dish for our delicious pork pie is going to be butter roasted beets. So what I've done is I've already oven roasted these beets. I started with 6 beets, put them in a 375 degree oven for about an hour, peeled them, and then I actually disked them up just like this. They're about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick. I did that with my gloves on because I wanted to make sure my hands didn't turn that purpley color. I'm using red beets. You can use golden beets if you want to. You can mix it all together. So let's start working on this butter sauce. So I've got 4 tablespoons of butter, and I'm gonna put that into my pan. And I'm gonna start melting that. And while this starts to break itself down, I have some parsley here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take it, and you can chop it or you can tear it if you want it to be like more medieval, authentic. And I want it to be about 3 tablespoons worth of parsley. So however that ends up breaking down for you. The only thing I want to avoid is getting stemmy chunks in there, because that's not going to be very delicious to eat. It's a very cooking technical term, stemmy chunks. So that looks pretty okie doke. And now what I'm going to do is come in with some salt and pepper, just to taste, just to your liking. And my beets are already cooked. What we're gonna be doing is basically glazing them inside of this butter sauce. So I've got my butter all melted down. I'm gonna come with my beets. And I'm gonna push those into my skillet. And now this is the part where we have the magic of television, and we're gonna come back in 5 minutes, check on these, and see how they are doing. All right, so we've been cooking this for about 5 minutes, and you can see the butter's gotten really foamy on here. I've been cooking it over medium-high heat, so I'm gonna drop my heat so I don't get any splitter splatter, because the last thing I'm gonna do is add just a splash that's not even an official measurement, but just like a one little bloop of balsamic vinegar. And now it's gonna start boiling again. That's why I dropped my heat. And I'm gonna stir this around. And I'm gonna cook this for another couple of minutes. And then my beets are done, and we're ready to plate these puppies up. But I think it's only fair that we make ourselves some dessert to go with this medieval feast. So let's get those ingredients ready. So to close out our royal feast, we're going to end with a blueberry tart. And we're going to start by making a lemon tart crust. So what I have in my bowl is 1 1/4 cup of flour. And to that, I'm going to sweeten it up just a little bit with 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar or confectioner's sugar, whatever your household calls it, and 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab my small whisk, and I'm going to gently whisk all that together. And now we're going to do just like we did with our pork pie at the beginning. We're going to take and bring in our butter. And we're going to do this with room temperature unsalted butter, and it needs to be 7 tablespoons. So what I've done is I'm just grabbing it just like before, and because we've got some lights so you can see me, my butter's a little bit soft. When I put in my pieces of butter, I just want them to be little pieces. Like if I was to just pinch a tiny bit off that stick of butter, they don't need to be huge, and it doesn't matter if your fingers get goopy because these are medieval recipes, so we are mixing by hand. We don't need to bring in machines for these. So now that I've got all my butter mixed in, if I look at this, I've got these little sandy bread-like pieces. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my lemon and I'm going to zest it. And so I've got a microplane zester here, so it's gonna give me really small little ribbons. So the thing is, when you're zesting fruit, you're gonna get this amazing smell wafting through your kitchen. But you need to be really careful, because if you get any of that white that's underneath, it's gonna turn really bitter with your flavoring that you add into whatever you're making. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna push this on in to my dough. And now all I need to do is just mush that around a little bit so I don't get a lemon bomb in the middle of my tart dough. So I've mixed that, and now I'm gonna add my 2 wet ingredients. I have a half a teaspoon of vanilla, and I have 1 egg, both the white and the yolk. And now I'm just gonna keep mixing again with my fingers. I'm gonna start by squeezing that yolk, and now I'm gonna work together all of these ingredients. It is gonna get super mushy in there and kind of ugly feeling, but you're on the right track. If it is still way too sticky after you've combined everything, you can add more flour. But this is one of those things where just be patient with it, because you'll be amazed how once you do get it all combined, it won't be too sticky. So I now have all of my dough worked together, and I didn't have to add any flour at all. And then this is where you have 2 choices. You can turn this out, you can get it into kind of a big thick disc, like 1 inch so thick, because you're gonna have to rest this in the refrigerator, or you can cheat like I'm gonna do. What I'll do is, instead of taking the time to roll it out and wrap it in plastic wrap so I can rest it in the fridge, I just take a plastic bag, and what I do is I close it most of the way, I smush out the extra air, and then all I need to do is shift it towards the middle, and then I just push it flat with my hand. And that's all that I need to do the same effect as if I were to start rolling it out. It doesn't change the texture at all with this dough recipe. It's a quick cheat, and then you can start cleaning up and not getting flour all over your rolling surface. So we'll put this in the refrigerator for 30 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll tartify. We took our dough out of the refrigerator, and we've got a totally different consistency now. It's much stiffer. So we are going to roll this out for our tart. So I'm gonna flour my surface. And now I'm gonna pop it out of my bag, or if you chose the plastic wrap method, then you could take it out of your plastic wrap. So I'm gonna set it on there. I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit on top. I'm gonna cover my hands with flour, because this dough is a little bit stickier than our pork pie dough. And now I'm just going to start rolling it. The reason we wanted to put it back into the refrigerator is it's gonna set up those butter solids again, and they'll be nice and stiff. If your dough is too cold, what's gonna happen is you're gonna start to see these little tiny cracks on there. If that happens, just give it a moment, let it warm up, and we've got all these fancy camera lights here that melted my butter, so this won't take just a moment, and it will be back to rollability. So what I did was I set my gauges once again to that 1/8 of an inch on there, and now I've got my tart pan. So remember, your tart pan is when you press the bottom and the bottom comes out of it, just like that. I don't need to grease my pan with my dough. I'm just gonna pick it up, slide it over, and now we're gonna do a gentle tuck to get it in there. I am gonna have a little bit of extra, and that can just easily be baked off in the oven. So I'm gonna come around, and I'm gonna fill in all my nooks and crannies around the edge. And when I'm doing this, I'm pulling it into the inside of the tart. I'm not taking the base of my tart and pushing back. And I'm just gonna do like I did with my first one. I'm gonna roll and take all my extra. This is fantastic dough with that lemon in there, so I can re-roll this out again, and I can just bake that off with some cinnamon and sugar on it, and it's gonna taste fantastic. So we do not have to pre-bake or blind bake this crust. So I'm gonna grab my carton of blueberries, which I've already washed, and I am going to take and pour just 1 layer of blueberries into my tart. I'm gonna roll them out flat. Oops, I missed a stem when I was cleaning them. Roll it out flat. And now that I've got a nice flat layer, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring in my flavoring component, and I'm gonna do that by taking some cinnamon and sugar. So I have a teaspoon of sugar and a teaspoon of cinnamon, And I'm just going to put this over the top, and I want it to turn this brown color because then that lets me know I have everything covered nicely. And you're probably thinking, wow, that's a lot of cinnamon, but when this comes out of the oven, we're gonna put another layer on the top of fruit. So it's kind of gonna be a fruit, cinnamon fruit layer. So what I need to do now is I have my oven at 375 degrees. Every gosh darn thing we made today was at 375 degrees. So we don't have to mess with our oven. I'm gonna put this in for 45 minutes. When it comes out, we are ready to put on layer number 2. So let's put it in the oven. Our blueberry tart is out of the oven. It is cooled and we are ready for our second layer. I took it out of my tart pan. It was just that easy lift out, and I moved it onto the plate that I'm going to serve from. So I'm now going to take a second container of blueberries and I'm going to sprinkle these over the top. Then we've got a combination of warm and cool berries. And just going to roll these over the top like so. You're gonna see some of that cinnamon poking out, and if you've got some that don't look quite right to you, you can pop those out. But now I've got that layer on there, and I have some powdered sugar. If you have a sifter, you can sift it, or you can just simply sprinkle over the top. It's just gonna add some of that extra sweetness. The nice thing about this tart is if you want to, you can make it ahead of time and serve it cold. It doesn't have to be hot, because then it's just more like a blueberry jam on the bottom. And then the last thing you do before you eat it is just sprinkle it with this powdered sugar. So we have 3 delicious recipes finished. Let's see what our medieval feast looks like. Our medieval feast is so ready for our premiere night, whether we're going to the theater to see the next Princess, King, Queen show, or maybe we're just hanging out in our living room watching something premiere. But we've got our pork pie made really just with an oven. That's our only modern tool to my knowledge. We have our roasted beets that are delicious. You can smell the caramelized butter. And then we have that fantastic blueberry tart to end our meal. So we are so ready for whatever demon or person charging and storming the gates is coming our way. So remember, the apron's optional, but the flavor isn't.
Nice. I think we got it.